That morning began with a strange feeling I couldn't quite name. The moment I stepped into the main lobby of Sterling and Cole, I felt a few co-workers' eyes slide past me faster than usual, as if they knew something I didn't. The sharp sound of my shoes striking the marble floor echoed in the vast space, mirroring the quickening rhythm of my heartbeat. A high-priority email had arrived at 5 a.m., demanding my presence in an executive meeting at 9. Emails like that always came with bad news, and anyone who received one would feel as if they were being walked to the guillotine. I still remember the hiss of the glass door when I walked into the conference room on the 49th floor. Cold white light from halogen lamps poured straight down onto the long wooden table, casting shadows on the American-style men in suits. Broad shoulders, dark ties, expressionless but sharp faces. The air felt heavy, like lead. Richard Coleman, the chairman, sat at the head of the table, fingers interlocked, staring at me as if trying to pierce through my skin. Beside him were Evan Hartley, the CFO, and Mark Dalton, head of legal. They rarely appeared together unless something big was threatening the company. "Carter, you know why you're here, don't you?" Richard began, his voice calm to the point of being chilling. I took a deep breath. "No, sir. I only received the urgent meeting request." Evan leaned forward. "The high-risk transactions from the last 3 months. We found your digital signature on them. Anything you want to explain?" I froze. I hadn't handled any project connected to the transactions they were referring to. I laid everything out clearly, step by step, just as a risk analyst must when complete transparency is required. But the more I spoke, the more I realized their eyes never wavered. They weren't here to listen. They were here to convict. Richard folded his arms and leaned back. "Carter, it's best you cooperate if you don't want things to get more difficult. You know, there are things we can help you remember." The words hit my ears like a knife. It wasn't a warning. It was a blunt threat. The air in the room tightened around my throat. In that moment, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone was deliberately pushing me into the center of a storm. I left the meeting room with a cold feeling crawling down my spine. I stopped near the glass railing by the elevator. From the 49th floor, Manhattan looked small, like a model city. But inside my head was a mountain of questions. Why me? Who forged my signature? And why now? I'm not someone who panics easily, but years on Wall Street taught me one thing. When the 3 most powerful people in the company look at you like a criminal, it means everything has already been arranged. And I was standing in the middle of a chessboard whose opening move I never saw. That evening, I stayed in the office longer than usual. After most employees had left, I returned to the 10th floor, where my department worked. I went into the secondary server room and used my access to open the data chain they mentioned. I wasn't sure what I hoped to find, but my instincts told me the answers were hidden in those cold lines of numbers. As I scanned the list of transactions, something made me stand upright. 2 records had been modified at 2 a.m. a week earlier. At that time, I was asleep in Brooklyn and hadn't logged in from any device. Someone had used my account, but the timestamp and access code didn't match any device I owned. This could only happen if someone in finance or legal used admin privileges to simulate my signature. I immediately sensed something bigger at play. I dug deeper, but the system suddenly flashed a message. "Access denied. Unauthorized attempt logged." Someone had locked my account in real time. In the few seconds before I was kicked out, I managed to copy part of the data onto a USB. Leaving the building, I felt like someone was watching me from across the street. But when I turned, all I saw were Manhattan's night traffic. Still, the unease clung to me until I reached my small apartment in Brooklyn. I sat at the wooden desk by the window, warm yellow lights spilling onto the data I'd copied. Tonight was the beginning of something massive, and I knew, even if I didn't fully understand the game yet, I had officially been pulled into a war they expected me to lose. But instead of fear, I felt something else. I wanted to know why they chose me. And I would find the answer, even if I had to turn all of Wall Street upside down. I returned to the company the next morning with a chaotic feeling that an entire sleepless night couldn't wash away. My apartment in Brooklyn suddenly felt too small for the weight pressing on my mind. A light drizzle coated the streets, the wet pavement reflecting the streetlights. I walked into Sterling and Cole with the calmest appearance I could muster. But inside, I was on full alert. I knew today would be different. Everything from this point on belonged to the territory of someone being hunted. When the elevator opened on the 10th floor, the atmosphere in the office had changed noticeably. Conversations stopped the moment I walked in, like a cold breeze had just swept across the room. I could sense it, even though they tried to act natural. Some people avoided my eyes. Others looked with curiosity mixed with suspicion. I understood. Rumors traveled faster than any official announcement on Wall Street. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, hoping to find some clue. But before I could even log in, an internal notification popped up. Your account has been temporarily restricted due to unusual activity. No signature, no explanation. I clenched my hands on the keyboard. This was exactly the next step in their plan. Cut off my access so I couldn't protect myself. I decided to go up to the 49th floor to find Mark Dalton, the only person in legal with the authority to lock my account. I knew he wouldn't welcome this conversation, but I had to try. The clock on the hallway wall ticked with a cold rhythm as I approached his office. The door was slightly open, and Mark was reading a thick stack of files. He didn't look surprised to see me, as if he had known I would show up. "Mark, I need an explanation about my account being locked," I said bluntly. He set the file down and leaned back in his chair. "Carter, this is standard procedure when an employee is linked to questionable transactions." I gritted my teeth. "You know I didn't make those transactions." Mark smiled without warmth. "I don't know anything. I only act according to the data." Data, a word lawyers love to hide behind. But I understood Mark better than he thought. Data could be created, edited, twisted, as long as it served the people trying to push me over the edge. I left without saying more because nothing I said would matter. They were ready to convict me, and I had only one option: find the truth before they closed the last door on me. I went down to the 4th floor, where the one person I trusted more than most others in this building worked, an IT technician who had been my friend when I first joined the company, Daniel Price. Daniel wasn't someone who enjoyed trouble, but he was honest, something rare at Sterling and Cole. When I told Daniel what happened, he glanced around and shut the door to his small server room. "Carter, you need to be careful. Strange things have been happening. They've been locking access, altering systems without notice. And I heard the trio on the 49th floor is preparing something big." My heart tightened. "Do you know anything about them editing the transaction records?" Daniel sighed. "I don't have proof, but I saw someone from legal accessing the server at odd hours. And, Carter, don't let them see you asking these questions. The people who got fired last week were all the ones who poked in the wrong places." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. But they also confirmed something. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was manipulating everything. Just as I was talking to Daniel, a red alert flashed across the system monitoring screen. "Unauthorized download attempt, reported to admin." Daniel's face went pale. "Carter, I think they know you downloaded data last night." I felt the ground drop beneath my feet. This meant they were watching every move I made. And possibly, I was being watched even now. I left the server room as calmly as I could. But once I stepped into the bright hallway, I realized I was no longer Carter, the model employee. I had become a target. That afternoon, as I left the building, the rain had grown heavier. I lifted my coat over my head and walked quickly along the sidewalk. A black SUV was parked across the street. Its window lowered slowly, revealing a stranger. A man with an earpiece, cold eyes, staring directly at me. No expression, no words. Just a look confirming that he knew who I was. A shiver ran down my spine. This was no longer just a company matter. Someone from the outside was involved in making me disappear. I went home, wound tight like a wire. When I stepped into my apartment, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You're getting too close. Stop." I stood there in the dark apartment, breathing heavily. Why did they want me to stop? What were they afraid I'd find? And if I stopped, what would happen to me? I knew the answer. If I stopped, I would vanish from this game, Literally. And because of that, I had only one choice: keep going. But to continue, I needed something more important than data. I needed an ally. The next morning, I walked into the company feeling like a fish thrown into a tank full of sharks circling around. The New York sun hadn't risen high yet, but the atmosphere inside Sterling & Cole had already thickened like poisonous fog. No one needed to say a word. A single glance at the lowered heads, the avoided eyes, told me everything I needed to know. The rumors about me had spread throughout the building. In this place, a shadow traveled faster than any official announcement from leadership. When I sat down at my desk, before I could even start my computer, a new email appeared. You are temporarily reassigned to Auxiliary Workspace, 12th floor. Please pack and move immediately. Short, cold, and with no explanation. I stared at the line for a few seconds and took a deep breath. This was exactly the next step in their plan. Isolate me from my familiar environment, cut my ties with the team, and push me into the dim corner where employees waiting for elimination were usually thrown. The 12th floor was a completely different world compared to my usual workspace. No windows, weak yellow lights, old furniture, and no one talking to anyone. The people sitting there resembled shadows of themselves, waiting for their day of removal. A few of them looked at me as I placed my laptop on the dusty desk in the corner, but no one said a word. At Sterling & Cole, everyone down here shared the same fate. They had become expendable. I sat down, opened my laptop, and tried to do the only thing still possible: figure out what exactly I was up against. I pulled up the data I had copied the night before, combing through every small detail, trying to stitch the fragments into a coherent picture. But the more I reviewed, the clearer something became. This wasn't a simple fraud. This was an entire system, complex, calculated, and controlled by unseen powerful hands. While I was focused on the screen, my phone vibrated. It was Daniel. He spoke briefly. Carter, meet me in the basement, tech area. There's something you need to know. His voice was lower and more urgent than usual, which made me immediately shut my laptop and head downstairs. The basement tech area was cold and dim, filled with the smell of metal and server dust. Daniel waited for me in a dark corner, his eyes heavy. Carter, I think you're touching something even I wouldn't dare touch. I need to know, I said without hesitation. He looked around, then pulled me closer. I checked the system logs last night. You were right. Someone from legal accessed the server at an unauthorized time. And, Carter, there's another group involved. I frowned. What group? Daniel lowered his voice to a whisper. An external group. They used a proxy to enter the internal system, and the IP address is tied to a financial underground organization the FBI used to monitor. My heart pounded. You mean someone outside the company is working with leadership? Daniel nodded. Yes, and I think they need someone to take the fall. You are perfect for that role. I clenched my fist. Why me? Daniel shrugged helplessly. Maybe because you're clean, you keep to yourself, you're easy to control, and most importantly, you spotted the irregularities too soon. In that moment, I felt the fog in my mind slowly clearing, revealing a dark truth. I was facing not only the power trio inside the company, but also invisible hands from the outside pulling the strings. Before I could respond, a security guard walked toward us. Daniel immediately pretended to check the machines while I stepped back into a shadowed corner. The guard passed without suspicion, but that was enough to make one thing clear. My time was running out. Whoever orchestrated this was watching every move. That afternoon, I decided to observe Evan Hartley myself. The man I suspected was the primary mastermind behind the manipulated transaction data. I followed him at a safe distance, about 30 meters, blending into the crowds of Manhattan. Evan hailed a taxi. I got into another one and followed. The taxi took Evan to a luxurious bar in the Upper East Side, the kind of place finance elites like to meet when they didn't want conversations recorded. I watched from afar as he met with 3 men sitting in a secluded booth. They didn't look like office workers. They looked like men used to operating outside the law. Black leather jackets, tattooed wrists, cold eyes. Evan bowed slightly when speaking to them. Not the gesture of a powerful man, but someone indebted. A chill ran along my spine. This was no longer speculation. Evan was tied to dangerous people. When they stood to leave, one of the men turned and looked straight at me. For the second time in 2 days. His eyes pierced through the distance, confirming that he knew I was watching. I turned away immediately, heart pounding, breath unsteady. Manhattan at night suddenly felt too large, and I too small for a war I didn't yet understand. Back home, I sank into my chair, hands trembling faintly. The fragments were now forming a clear picture. I wasn't just being set up by the company. I was being placed between two forces, one inside, one outside, and both wanted me as their sacrifice. In that chaos of thoughts, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a threat. Just 4 words. I can help you. Unknown number. But something in my gut told me this wasn't an enemy. This was the ally I had been desperately searching for. That morning began with a blow I didn't see coming. As soon as I unlocked my phone, the screen flooded with news, alerts, and messages. The lines flashing across it froze me in place for several long seconds that felt like an eternity. Sterling and Coal analyst suspected of manipulating trades. Right beneath it was my face, taken from an angle that could only come from the company's internal cameras. The article had been published simultaneously on 3 major outlets: Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and the New York Times. Within minutes, my image had been dragged through the mud before I could even speak a word. I stood in my apartment, my heart pounding as if someone had wrapped a fist around my chest. The air thickened. I knew instantly who was behind it, and their goal was to destroy my reputation before I had any chance to fight back. When I stepped into Sterling and Coal, the space vibrated with a strange kind of explosive silence. People who used to greet me every morning now looked at me like I was an unfamiliar, suspicious stranger. A few huddled near the coffee station, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. That's him. I heard he tricked the whole system. Never saw it coming. I walked past them without stopping, without reacting. The more shaken I looked, the easier it would be for them to bury me. As soon as I sat down, an internal email was already waiting. Requesting Carter Montgomery to the 49th floor conference room immediately. I knew this meeting would be an unofficial trial, and I would be the only one on the stand. But I had to face it, even if 3 wolves were waiting to tear me apart. The 49th floor conference room was as cold as ever, but today it carried a different scent, the scent of judgment. Richard Coleman sat at the center of the table, expressionless. Evan Hartley stood by the window, arms crossed. Mark Dalton had a thick stack of documents in front of him, and I knew with a single glance they were filled with fabricated accusations. Richard spoke first. Carter, I think you should know the situation has gotten out of control. The company can't protect actions like this. I looked him straight in the eyes. I didn't do anything the media wrote about. Someone... Mark interrupted with the tone of someone reading a verdict. We have transaction logs, digital signatures, and proof you accessed the system illegally last night. My heart dropped. They had assembled everything to build a monster, and named it me. I accessed the system because you accused me without proof. And those 2 transactions were altered while I was asleep in Brooklyn. I have data. Evan stepped forward, eyes full of contempt. Carter, don't make this worse. You betrayed the company. The best thing you can do now is stay quiet. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. They didn't want explanations. They wanted submission. But silence would only make it easier for them to erase me. Richard stared at me for a long moment before exhaling, as if he were tired of the entire situation. Don't fight anymore, Carter. Sign the acknowledgement. In return, the company will support you privately. This is our final offer. Final offer. A polite way of saying, we've already decided to kill your career, but you can choose whether it hurts a little or a lot. I didn't answer, not because I was afraid, but because I refused to waste another breath on a cheap setup. I stood, looking directly at the 3 most powerful men in the company. I'm not signing anything, and I will prove my innocence. Evan laughed, a short, sharp sound like a blade. Carter, you have nothing. No, I said quietly. I have the truth. I walked out, The heavy door closed behind me like the final punctuation mark of the first chapter of a war. A war I never chose, but one I could no longer walk away from. As the elevator descended, my phone vibrated. A single message from an unknown number. I know they framed you. Meet me tonight. Sophia Reed. Sophia Reed. A name I'd never heard. But something in my gut told me this wasn't the next trap. It was the only exit I desperately needed. And tonight, my war would enter an entirely new phase. That night, I chose a small cafe in Brooklyn, exactly the location the message had instructed. It sat on a quiet street corner, the warm yellow glow from its windows softening the harsh winter cold. I walked in, removed my coat's hood, and surveyed the entire room. Only 3 customers were inside, and none looked like the person who had texted me. I chose a corner table, my back against the wall so no one could approach from behind. Just a few minutes later, the door opened. A woman walked in. She wore a black coat, her long hair tied neatly back, her eyes sharp and alert. She scanned the entire room before heading toward me. When she reached my table, she gave a small smile. Not exactly friendly, but not threatening either. "Carter Montgomery?" she asked. "That's me. And you are?" "Sophia Reed, FBI." My heart skipped a beat. I never imagined I would one day sit across from a federal agent in a tiny Brooklyn cafe. Yet at the same time, part of me felt lighter, as if someone had finally appeared who wasn't aligned with the people trying to destroy me. Sophia pulled out a badge from inside her coat and placed it on the table. I examined it carefully. It was real. She put it away, opened a small notebook, and looked me straight in the eyes. "I've been investigating Sterling & Cole for over 6 months, and I know someone inside the company is setting you up as the fall guy." The sentence hit me like a punch straight to the chest, confirming the suspicion that had been eating at me for days. "How much do you know?" I asked. "Enough to know you're not the one manipulating trades," she said. "Enough to know there's an offshore account tied to an underground financial group. And enough to know you accessed the data they wanted to bury." I stayed quiet for a moment. "So why contact me?" "Because you're the only one inside the system who hasn't been bought." Sophia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And because they want to erase you. Metaphorically, or even literally." A chill ran down my spine. "How certain are you of that?" "Carter, I've handled many cases like this. When a company tries to frame an innocent employee, their next step is always cleaning up loose ends. And people are the easiest loose ends to clean." Her last sentence made me turn to look out the window, where Brooklyn traffic rolled under the streetlights. I thought of the man in the black SUV staring at me, his cold eyes cutting through the glass. I looked back at Sophia. "If you know all this, why don't you arrest them?" Sophia sighed. "Not enough evidence. We can monitor from the outside, but we can't access the core data, the master ledger. The only person who can get it is you." It felt like I was being pulled into a bottomless pit. "You want me to be the bait?" "No," Sophia said slowly. "They want you to be the bait. I want you alive." That sentence silenced me. For the first time in days, someone wasn't treating me like a pawn to sacrifice. Sophia tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "Carter, you have the data you copied last night, but it's not enough. We need something bigger. The one thing that can bring the entire network down. The master ledger." I frowned. "Do you know where it's stored?" "Yes," she said. 49th floor, behind the secondary server room, inside an independent security module. Accessible only to top-level personnel." I let out a short laugh. "So, you want me to break into the place where they've already revoked my access?" "Not break in," Sophia said. "Take back what should be yours, and what belongs to justice." I stared into my cup of still warm coffee, my mind churning. Part of me wanted to run, away from the company, away from the power struggle, away from the eyes hunting me daily. But the other part, the part that refused to be sacrificed, rose stronger than ever. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Sophia opened her bag and placed a silver USB drive on the table. "This is our extraction tool. Once you plug it into the system, it will automatically copy the entire ledger within 90 seconds. And during those 90 seconds, if I get caught, you won't walk out alive." Sophia finished my sentence. But if you succeed, we'll take down the entire operation. We. That word echoed inside my head like a spark in the dark. I had been fighting alone all this time. Now, for the first time, I had a real ally. I looked into her eyes. I'll do it. Sophia smiled, and this time, the smile wasn't cold. I knew you would. She stood to leave, but before reaching the door, she turned back. Carter, remember, from this moment on, every step you take is being watched. But I'll be watching them too. So I'm not alone? Sophia shook her head gently. No, Carter, not anymore. When she left the cafe, I remained seated with the USB lying on the table. It was small, yet it felt as heavy as a weapon. And I knew that once I picked it up, there would be no turning back. That night, I left the cafe feeling both terrified and strengthened. I stepped into the Brooklyn night, my hand gripping the USB in my coat pocket, and for the first time, instead of running from their trap, I was ready to turn it into my weapon. I spent the entire following afternoon thinking about the plan Sophia had given me. Breaking into the 49th floor, the most secure area in Sterling and Cole, wasn't just reckless, it was practically suicide. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I did nothing, they would end my career and my life in a way I wouldn't even see coming. I arrived at the company earlier than usual that morning. The Manhattan sky was gray, cold wind slapping my face awake. I walked into the building like someone carrying a mission carved into his bloodstream. People still stared at me with suspicion, but today, their looks no longer felt heavy. After talking to Sophia, I knew I was no longer fighting alone. The 12th floor was as cold and gloomy as ever. I sat down, opened my laptop, pretending to focus on work. But my mind was running through a chain of calculations. Where the cameras were, when the guards switched shifts, how restricted my card access was, and who I needed to leverage to get past the first layer of security. About an hour later, Daniel texted, "Meet me in the tech storage." I immediately left and went down to the basement. Daniel was waiting, arms crossed, expression more serious than I'd ever seen. The moment he spotted me, he pulled me into the dimmest corner of the room. "Carter, I need you to listen carefully," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. "I checked the access logs. Your permissions to the main server area are completely locked. But there's a way." "I'm listening." "If you enter through the maintenance corridor, you won't need a key card. But..." Daniel looked at me with a warning in his eyes. "That path has its own cameras, and the footage isn't stored on the main system. It's kept separately in a private server only security personnel can access." "You're saying I'll be recorded clearly?" "Yes. If you go in clumsily, they'll have direct video evidence to charge you with even worse." I exhaled heavily. Dead ends filled with traps. "So what's your solution?" Daniel looked around, then pulled a key card from his jacket pocket. "My card. It has access to the 49th floor, but you only get one chance. If the system senses anything abnormal, it'll lock the card instantly." I stared at him. "Daniel, this could get you into deep trouble." He let out a faint laugh, though his eyes carried no humor. "I've been stuck in the basement for months, Carter. My career is already dead. But if I can bring those bastards down with me, then it's worth it." I nodded, a heavy wave of gratitude rising inside me. Daniel wasn't just a coworker. He was the only one in the entire company brave enough to stand by me. That night I decided to act. Not early morning, not midday, but around 9 p.m., when the 49th floor was nearly empty, and the guards were used to employees working late shifts. I stood inside the elevator, my hand gripping Sophia's USB. Daniel's keycard felt like a gambler's last chip in my coat pocket. If I failed, my life would end in the shadows of the 49th floor. If I succeeded, I'd drag an entire power network down. 49th floor. I pressed the button, my heartbeat uneven. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, releasing me into a cold corridor. Everything on the 49th floor was always spotless. Gray stone floors, glass walls overlooking the bright city. But tonight, it felt like a tomb. I walked quickly toward the secondary server room. The air conditioner's hum masked the sound of my footsteps. I slid the card into the reader. Beep. Green light. Door unlocked. I entered without inhaling too deeply. Any movement, any sound mattered. The room was icy, my breath turning into mist. Rows of servers blinked like constellations. At the back, a small door, leading to the independent security module. I approached, swiped the card. Red light. Access denied. My heart dipped. Daniel had said his card worked for the 49th floor, but not necessarily the module. I glanced around. No cameras directly facing me, only two wide-angle ones from the corners. They'd catch me if I broke in. I recalled Sophia's words. You only need 90 seconds. I studied the control panel. The module used an older electronic lock, the kind IT never bothered upgrading. I took out the USB, gently popped open a hidden compartment, and removed a micro connector. Sophia had equipped me with more than data. She'd given me a lock override tool. I connected the wire to the panel, my heartbeat nearly cracking my ribs. 30 seconds later, the door clicked open. I stepped inside. The module was small, just enough for a single standalone server. I plugged the USB into the red-marked port. The USB began blinking. Sophia was right. It ran automatically. 30 seconds. 40. 50. I heard a sound at the outer door. Someone was entering. My body froze. Footsteps echoed. Steady, slow, as if the person already knew someone was inside. I held my breath until my chest ached. 70 seconds. The USB's light was blinking rapidly. The person stopped right at the door I had forced open. A hand turned the knob. 80 seconds. The USB blinked one last time. Complete. I yanked the USB out, shut down the module, and pressed myself against the wall. As the door opened, I slipped behind a nearby server rack, heart slamming against my ribs. The man stepped in. I recognized him immediately. One of the three men who sat with Evan at the bar. He stood in the center of the room, eyes sweeping across the servers. I knew one mistake here, and I would never leave the 49th floor alive. When he turned his back, I moved. Quietly. Precisely. Slipping out of the room. Pushing the door without letting it slam. Walking quickly, but not running. One wrong step, one sudden move, and he'd know. I reached the elevator just as he turned around. The doors closed. I inhaled sharply, lungs burning. My hand clutched the USB. The only piece of evidence that could turn the entire board upside down. I stepped out of the elevator and walked out of the building like someone who had just returned from the dead. Manhattan at 10 p.m. was still blazing with light, but to me, every glow felt blurred under the adrenaline still racing through my veins. I stopped at a street corner, inhaling the freezing air to remind myself I was still alive. At least for now. I pulled out my phone and texted Sophia. It's done. Seconds later, she replied, Leave the area immediately. They may have detected abnormal access. I walked faster, changing direction constantly as instinct guided me. Every car passing by made me tense. With the kind of people Evan was connected to, following me would be nothing but routine. I walked to a small park where the lights were dim and few people were around. When I sat down on the icy wooden bench, my heart was still pounding so violently I could feel it in my fingertips. I reached into my coat and took out the USB I had nearly died to retrieve. It was terrifyingly small, just a few centimeters long, yet heavy with enough evidence to drag an entire financial empire into ruin. My phone buzzed. Sophia was calling. Carter, did you get out safely? Her voice was sharper and rougher than usual. I'm still alive, I answered, trying to sound calm. But someone entered the room right after I finished copying. Sooner than I expected, Sophia exhaled. You need to leave the area now. Do not go home. Do not go anywhere familiar. I frowned. You think they'll hunt me tonight? Not think, Carter. I know. Her voice dropped. The man you saw in the server room. He works for a private group with a history of doing dirty jobs for major corporations. Once they suspect you, nowhere will be safe. I scanned the park, a cold shiver running down my spine. Then where do I go? To me, Sophia said immediately. I'll send you the address. We need to check the data tonight. This isn't the kind of evidence you keep in your pocket. I was silent for a moment. I trust you. Good. And Carter. She paused before ending the call. You did what very few people would dare. Don't let fear pull you back now. She hung up. I stood and left the park quickly. I didn't take the main streets. I slipped through narrow alleys, dark corners, avoiding the eyes of strangers. Brooklyn felt colder than usual, as if the entire city was watching me move. About 40 minutes later, I reached Sophia's address. It was a small apartment on the second floor of an old building, windows covered by thick curtains. A dim light glowed from inside. I knocked twice, exactly as instructed in her message. The door cracked open, and Sophia pulled me inside swiftly, as if someone might be tailing me. "Were you followed?" she asked. "I didn't see anyone," I replied. "But I'm not sure." Sophia locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, then extended her hand. The USB, I placed it in her palm. She immediately plugged it into a laptop wrapped in anti-tracking protection. She typed quickly as files started loading, streams of encrypted data appearing on the screen. Sophia stared intensely at the laptop, her breathing slightly uneven with tension. "If the ledger is in here," she murmured, "Sterling and Cole will crumble." "We?" I echoed. Sophia turned to me, eyes firm. "Yes, you and me. You're no longer a framed employee. You're the key witness in this investigation." I sank into a chair, feeling both relieved and burdened. I had always wanted justice to prevail. But justice had a price. And sometimes, that price was your life. Sophia opened a specific file requiring a password. "Do you remember that strange code in the data you copied earlier?" she asked. "Yes. I didn't think it was a normal transaction string." She nodded. "That was the key to the ledger. They hid the password inside the manipulated data." I read the code from my phone. Sophia typed it in. A soft click. The screen exploded into a massive spreadsheet of numbers, graphs, offshore account listings. A network stretching from the Cayman Islands to Malta to Singapore. Sophia's jaw dropped, a rare moment where she let emotion show. "My God." I stared at the screen. Huge numbers. Each transaction signed by two identifiers, one belonging to an anonymous holder, and the other belonging to Evan Hartley. And not just Evan. Two more names emerged, Richard Coleman and Mark Dalton. Sophia looked at me. "Carter, this isn't just internal fraud. This is an international money laundering operation." And I was almost turned into their scapegoat. Sophia nodded slowly. "If you hadn't taken the ledger before they noticed, you would have been the first one to disappear." The air in the apartment grew heavy. "What's next?" I asked. Sophia stood, gripping the USB and laptop tightly. "Tomorrow, I'll submit everything to the FBI. But tonight, you stay here. You don't leave this apartment." "Why?" "Because once they realize the ledger is gone, the first person they'll come for is you." I leaned back in the chair, taking a long breath. The truth was massive, dark. But now I saw the entire picture. And most importantly, I had the evidence. Sophia looked back at me once more before saying, "Carter, you survived the worst moment of your life. But tomorrow is when the real war begins." I didn't respond. I just clenched my fists. I was ready. I hardly slept that night. Not because of fear, but because everything felt like it was moving toward a point of no return. Sophia worked non-stop on her laptop, checking each piece of data in the ledger, cross-referencing old reports, marking every irregular transaction. I sat only a few steps away, quietly watching the blue light reflect on her focused expression. It was the face of someone who had stared into darkness many times, and still chose to stand on the side of justice. Around 5:30 a.m., Sophia closed the laptop and turned to me. "It's time," she said. "We have to leave before the city is fully awake." I stood, put on my coat. "We're going straight to the FBI?" "No," she replied, her voice lower. "We're going to a satellite office. Fewer people know about it. Harder for them to track." She opened the curtain a sliver and peered outside. "I don't see anything suspicious. But Carter, be careful. Last night you crossed paths with people who don't hesitate to hurt others." I nodded. I had known that since the moment I saw the cold eyes of the man in the server room. But this morning, I wasn't afraid anymore. I carried something they could never control. We left the apartment through the back entrance. Sophia walked a few steps ahead, her eyes scanning both sides of the street. I followed, my hand gripping the pocket where the original Ledger USB was hidden. The one Sophia insisted I carry in case things went wrong. When we reached the main street, a black SUV parked at the corner made Sophia stop. She put a hand on my shoulder and pulled me back behind a bus stop. "That's not my vehicle," she whispered, We circle around. We moved through a narrow alley behind the morning market, slipping past wooden crates and the smell of fresh coffee. When we reached the next street, Sophia hailed a regular taxi. She looked calm, but I knew tension was weighing on every step she took. When the taxi stopped, I opened the door for her, then climbed in. Sophia gave the address in an even tone, but her eyes never stopped scanning the mirrors. Manhattan mornings were always busy, but today it felt like every passing face was watching us. As we turned onto 3rd Avenue, Sophia leaned closer to me. Carter, you need to be prepared. When this breaks open, the media won't let you breathe. But this time, the truth is on your side. I answered quietly. I don't care what the media thinks anymore. I just want to tear down the people who wanted me dead. Sophia smiled slightly, her eyes showing respect. And you will. When the taxi stopped in front of a small gray office building, Sophia paid and led me inside. She swiped her badge at the door and guided me through the security hallway. A desk agent nodded at her and locked the door behind us. The room we entered was small but fully equipped. Sophia set her laptop on the table, plugged in her USB, and began uploading the ledger data to the FBI's internal server. I stood behind her, my fingers laced together. Each second felt like a stretched wire ready to snap. It's done, Sophia said. The ledger is uploaded. From now on, no one can touch it. I exhaled, relief spreading for only a moment, before the door burst open. A field agent stormed in, voice sharp.
We have a problem.
Sophia turned. What happened? Sterling and Cole just reported an unauthorized breach in their system. They submitted video footage from the 49th floor, and they filed a request to arrest Carter Montgomery. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sophia stepped forward, shielding me. That footage is manipulated. I authorized Carter's actions last night. Everything he did was under my investigation. The agent looked at her skeptically. Sophia, command has been alerted. This won't go the way you think. Sophia clenched her jaw. I'll take full responsibility, but he is my primary witness. No one touches him. Silence hung in the room for several tense seconds. Finally, the agent sighed heavily, shut the door, and left. Sophia turned to me. Carter, this case has outgrown internal boundaries. Once they realize the ledger is gone, they'll do anything to erase you. I know, I said quietly. But now we have evidence, and the FBI won't let them walk away. Sophia sat down to write the official report. I took a seat across from her, feeling the chaos in my mind slowly settling. I didn't know how long the investigation would take, how they would strike back, or whether I'd be dragged through the media storm again. But I knew one thing. I was no longer the scapegoat. About an hour later, Sophia finished the report. She stood, walked over to me, and spoke more gently than before. Carter, from now on, you'll be under witness protection. You'll move to a temporary location, and we'll ensure your safety. I met her steady gaze. Sophia, thank you. Without you, I would have been dead long ago. She shook her head. No. You survived because you fought. I just opened the one door they hadn't locked yet. I let out a small laugh. How do you think this will all end? Sophia looked out the window, where the first rays of morning sunlight slipped between the skyscrapers. No one can predict the end, but I know one thing. She turned back to me. The people who tried to sacrifice you will fall to the truth they tried to bury. I took a deep breath, feeling the first sense of peace after weeks. Today, the real war begins. And this time, I wasn't walking on their chessboard. I was turning the board over.